Deep inside the imperial audience chamber of Valhalla, the air itself felt different. Roman Dmitri stood at the center of the hall, completely still, while the Empire's immortal soldiers closed in from every direction. These were no ordinary fighters. They were the backbone of Valhalla's military dominance, warriors who could not be permanently destroyed. And yet, Roman didn't move a single step backward. As the soldiers charged, Roman's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. One measured swing of his sword, and the nearest attacker was cleanly bisected before the man even registered the threat. A second soldier lunged from behind, hoping to exploit the opening. Roman deflected the strike without even turning to look, then cut the attacker down with the same quiet efficiency. What made the scene strange wasn't the speed or the precision, it was the calm. Roman watched the fallen soldiers dissolve into particles of light, reform from nothing and rise again, completely restored. He smiled, not with relief, with curiosity. He pressed forward anyway. The next pass was different. Roman didn't wait for them to fully reconstitute. He moved through the chamber like a current, dismantling every soldier in his path and denying them the time they needed to recover. His objective wasn't to destroy them permanently. It was to clear a path. Roman launched himself directly toward the throne, his sword raised high. The stone floor fractured from the force of his leap. For a brief moment, it seemed like the Emperor himself would be struck down in his own hall. But the throne was empty when the blade fell. The impact shattered the Emperor's seat completely, stone and timber exploding outward across the chamber floor. And just beyond the great doorway, the Emperor reappeared for only a moment. His expression wasn't fear, it was amusement. He acknowledged that the encounter had been genuinely entertaining, then vanished entirely. What followed was silence, then chaos. The officials who had built their careers on loyalty to the imperial crown stood paralyzed. Among them was Marquis Belelfir, a man of considerable rank within the empire, and right now, a man who looked like he was trying very hard not to show how frightened he was. Roman turned toward him, unhurried, deliberate. When one of the officials broke down and threw himself to the ground begging for mercy, Roman responded without hesitation, cutting the man down in a single motion. The chamber went absolutely silent. Roman looked at the body with an expression of cold indifference and simply noted that no one had given the man permission to speak. He then turned his attention back to Belelfir. Grabbing him by the throat, Roman spoke plainly. He told the Marquis that pride had been Valhalla's downfall, that if the Empire had ever chosen to honestly face the reality of what was happening in the north, even once, things might have ended differently. Roman gestured around the hall at the kneeling officials and told Belelfir to look carefully. These were the men who had pledged everything to an emperor who had just abandoned them without a second thought. Belelfir was left alive. That, in its own way, was the cruelest choice Roman could have made. Far from the capital, deep within a forest near the northern mountain range, a teleportation circle burned itself into the earth. Roman stepped through, with Nox waiting nearby, visibly exhausted from the effort of maintaining the spell without a proper warp gate. Nox expressed concern that the entire operation had been unnecessarily reckless. Roman, walking ahead without breaking stride, told him the mission was never about killing the Emperor. The real objective had been something far more difficult to undo: doubt. Roman had wanted the people of Valhalla, its soldiers, its nobility, its officials, to understand that the Empire could be reached, that even the Emperor could be made to flee, that the invincibility they had always taken for granted was, in fact, not guaranteed. That kind of damage doesn't heal with more soldiers. It spreads. Back inside the ruined audience chamber, the Emperor reappeared, settling onto the shattered remains of his throne with practiced composure. His expression, however, was cold. He looked at the surviving officials less like allies and more like a liability he was tolerating for now. When Marquis Belelfir bowed and told him they had been fortunate to survive, the Emperor's reply was brief and ominous. He hoped those words were sincere. Then came the new orders. The bulk of Valhalla's military forces were to be redirected. Only a minimum holding force would remain to contain the resistance at Hernard. Everything else was to be focused entirely on Roman Dmitri. Belelfir accepted the command without argument, but privately he understood something that had shifted permanently. The atmosphere in that hall was not the same. The quiet deference that the Emperor had always commanded, the unspoken certainty that Valhalla was untouchable, was gone, and the officials around him felt it too. Roman hadn't just invaded the capital, he had changed what the Empire believed about itself. Meanwhile, on the battlefield at Hernard, the rebel forces were being pushed to their absolute limit. Sanchez stood beside Duke Vito, both of them aware that the situation was critical. Sanchez carried the weight of knowing that the Duke had committed everything to this fight, and that they were close to losing. Duke Vito refused to accept that framing. He told Sanchez to keep fighting and stop treating the battle as already lost. Then, from the enemy camp, a sound cut through the noise. A signal, the order to retreat. The Valhalla soldiers looked just as surprised as anyone. But orders were orders, and they pulled back from the walls without delay. The rebel fighters of Hernard didn't cheer immediately. They stood there, uncertain, processing what they were seeing. Then the understanding settled over them all at once. The siege was over. They had held. The cheers that followed weren't triumphant. They were the sound of exhausted people who had simply survived something they weren't supposed to. Roman's infiltration of the Valhalla imperial capital is complete. The emperor has retreated. The nobility has been rattled. An entire empire now knows that its walls are not as high as they believed. And somewhere in the north, Roman is already planning the next move. The question isn't whether Valhalla will respond, it's whether that response will arrive in time.